Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Season 1, Episode 7. Boy Savior. As promised, I went ahead and watched the intro this time. Kind of wish I didn't, actually, because it ruined the episode. Ruined is a bit exaggerative, but diminished might be a better word. So, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the intro, since this is the first time I've watched it. We start off with a big old block of clay, and it's one giant chunk of clay from which both sisters are carved. Obvious symbolism is obvious. Also, the usage of the clay aesthetic makes sense, since most of the show has what I've actually referred to several times as a clay aesthetic. It's actually 3D models with like an oil painting aesthetic painted on top of them. But the perspective I've always had is that it's very clay, that it looks like, very, very painterly, right? Like a figurine, right? Like you carve out figurines and then you paint them. No, not like Warhammer. Different thing. That's plastic or 3D printing material, whatever that's actually called. So yeah, that's cool. Then we see Jace, who has the Monostone, which makes sense, driving the plot and the setting both. Victor, very quick shot of him with his book. Caitlin with her gun. Heimerdinger with his patterns. Mel with her position of power. And then the girls being protected by Vander. And then it cuts back to Silka, who's behind Vander. He's also the only statue that moves in this whole intro. Silco actually raises his head so you could see his eye. Oh, the misery. Totally different approach from this point in the intro outwards. Previously, everything was fairly static, with the exception of Silco. Silco moving is the indicator that things have now changed, and now we see rotating shots of a lot of motion. It looks like so much of the clay has been shattered at this point that now they're in some kind of, for lack of a better word to put, an asteroid field of, the chunks and bits and pieces of the models of the figurines. And we see Echo, who's doing his thing. We know it's Echo now. Caitlin with her gun. Jace and his hammer. That's the part I wish I hadn't seen. Jinx with her minigun. Vi with the power fist. Called that one. And of course, Vi and Jinx are fighting each other. Yeah. And honestly, well, this is a pretty solid intro. Good symbolism. I actually like this piece of the song. Some good stuff. I wish I hadn't watched it yet. This is the exact reason why I tend to skip intros when it comes to these things, legitimately. Because if this is the intro it's always been, and I'm going to assume that it is, this is massive spoilery. What is it with shows in doing that? Because I've noticed virtually all shows do that. Like the intros that spoil is just a thing. This is even a thing in video games. You ever play a Tales of game? Same thing. They will spoil major character connections and beats that can and should have impact right there in the intro. Usually while some person's singing about da 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 in the background. Oh well. What did the intro spoil? Oh gee. Well, first of all, our cast, but let's ignore that for a moment. The significance of Vander protecting the girls, the significance of Silco as one of the dominant villains. Okay, none of that's really a big deal. But remember, Silco wasn't even really a thing early on. So the moment we see him, it's like, yeah, okay. But the most important things it spoiled were, A, Jace is going to take up a giant hammer in defense of things despite being this geeky little scientist who insists on not fighting, something that's even a major element of this particular episode. B, the fact that Powder, as we would have known her at the time, is going to have this giant minigun, which she's going to use specifically fighting Vi. Like that is a massive spoiler right there, especially if we were watching this back in episode 1, and I would have caught that immediately. If you remember, for those of you, if you remember, this is exactly what happened. Like, if you remember, the very, very first thing I did when I was watching the first episode 2 weeks ago now, is I sat down and I'm like, okay. And I let it play pretty much up until the girls were being carved from the clay, to which I said, skip, because I knew, I could tell the format, right? I could just tell based on how it was being presented, that they were going to be showcasing stuff, and that was immediate spoilers. And that's true of Bionic Punk. I have, of course, played League of Legends, but I also had absolutely no idea who any of these people were. Truthful statement, none of these characters were ones I actually recognized. Oh, absolutely, Lord Harriman, 100%. Like, the stylings, the color, give that away if nothing else does. I mean, that could be argued, Magister, but if there's ever a good example of why I have the no spoilering policies that I do, I have just demonstrated it for you. Because, yeah, exactly, Bionic Punk. Because anybody who is watching Arcane and unfamiliar with LoL would be massively spoiled by this intro. Now, of course, if you've played LoL, especially recently, you'd be like, oh yeah, no, that's whatever, of course. We know where this is going. We know the bomb's under the table, and that just hits differently. But please tell me that you cannot tell me, I'm sorry, I'm saying this right, you cannot tell me that there aren't a large number of people who haven't played LoL and will never play LoL who were interested in this show. In fact, one of the more common comments I've gotten on these Streaminations, for Arcane specifically, is how much a large body of people who were refusing to touch this show because of its connection to LoL have started watching this show. Because, you know, it's an extremely good show. You get my point. It's why I tend to have that thing. Does the intro affect the scores? No. Intro is a little bit different in this kind of a thing. Like, obviously, this is kind of an asterisk-y situation. When I'm reviewing a game, I'll use Tales of as an example. I absolutely can and will ding an intro for being the spoilery. I have before. We've given those negatives before, to a varying degree, depending how bad it is. But we're not really reviewing the shows in the same way. This is not a point-by-point positives or negatives kind of a thing. And so I'm just going to wash over intros. So you'll notice all of these ratings don't include the intros at all, and that's on purpose. That's true for every show I've ever covered. That's a shame, Bionic Punk, but not uncommon, unfortunately. I mean, I'm not sure I can name a major setting that I enjoy that doesn't have, you know, people who just kind of abuse the franchise or the setting or the lore or whatever. Like Warcraft, yeah, I've played BFA, I've played Shadowlands. StarCraft, that's completely abandoned because it doesn't sell as well. Star Wars, nuff said. Star Trek, nuff said. How about Battletech? You'd think Battletech lore is pretty cohesive, and you'd be wrong. Because while Battletech lore has some fascinating stuff to it, by God, do they love to just crap all over things. Do I even need to bring up the Crusade? No, not that one. No, not that one either. Yeah, Mass Effect? You get it. So I'm kind of with you on that, Bionic Punk. It's why, if I could diverge this for just a second into something that I swear is tangentially related. The older I get, the more I realize I need to be more compartmentalized with enjoying something. You know, if I'm going to make up an example, if they come up with Knife Dancer, and like there's 5 games in the Knife Dancer series, and I only really like Knife Dancer 3. That's fine. Knife Dancer 3 does some cool and interesting stuff and makes me engaged in the setting and the concepts and the world building. And I can just take Knife Dancer 3, pull it out from the rest of the franchise, and enjoy that in a vacuum, right? I may have to acknowledge the others for the purposes of something like a review. But in terms of my own personal enjoyment, yeah, no, I'm good. That's a good question, Dr. Winter. I have no idea. Knife Dancer sounds like an interesting game, doesn't it? It's like a rhythm game, you know? And yet, yeah, Cashel says something else. Recently, I have covered Andor. Yeah, no kidding. You can enjoy Andor without enjoying anything else in Star Wars. That's another good example. Recently, I've covered 2 of the best shows I have ever seen. And I do not say that hyperbolically. I say that I can watch a show and have varying levels of enjoyment out of it. But when I sit down and I do an analysis of a show, it's different. Anybody who knows me knows that. When I actually sit down and I point by point things, my opinion is what I would call more codified. I can understand my own opinion. And usually speaking, my analysis opinion varies at least a little bit from my casual glance opinion, right? If I'm just watching an episode of Star Trek, that's whatever. But if I'm analyzing an episode of Star Trek, my opinion can change because I'm paying attention. right? The reason I say all that is from my own perspective, something that I actually bother to analyze is something that's closer to my real opinion, right? That's my actual thoughts on the matter, which I say all of that to get across the idea that I have covered two of the best shows I have ever seen recently. And it's worth noting I've analyzed a lot of shows in my time at this point. Let's see, we've got Voyager, TOS, TNG, DS9, Enterprise. That's 5 Star Trek shows right off the bat. Babylon 5, Clone Wars, Rebels, Mandalorian, Andor, Arcane, Edge Runners. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing one. I suppose I could mention the Donkey Kong Country show, just for the sake of completion, but let's not. Justified, thank you. I know there was another one. Justified. We'll add Justified to the list. And I think that's 13 or so, something like that. 13 shows. Oh yeah, thank you, Young Justice and My Little Pony. So that's 15 shows that I have covered, that I've analyzed, that I've spent time and effort actually digging into. And of those, I still say that Andor and Arcane are just absolute cream of the crop of that. They are freak outliers of quality, which I say to try and pull this back into something Cashel mentioned earlier. God, can we get more of these, please? Like, even just a 9-episode show of Warcraft done with this level of quality and this styling and this just done this well is the kind of thing that I would be extraordinarily in favor of. And that is not the only setting I could say that about. Normally, this is where I'd say I'd love that for something like, say, Star Wars, but we have that because we have Andor. God, yeah, I know, it's crazy, ISD. Thank you for 2 years of support, Judo Joker. Very, very much. Always appreciate. I will jot that down. Hitman 3, Cyberpunk, and Siphon Filter Omega Strain. Thank you. Anyways, sorry, this is getting way off in the weeds. I apologize, but the overall point of this is, yeah, this is crazy. Because one of the things I've been talking about recently is animation, which this is, and how difficult it is for shows to justify their existence. I'm going to talk about this very briefly because this is the 3rd time I've said this week. But I know that, especially for the YouTube side, you probably haven't been watching everything I've been covering, and you might not be watching all these videos, and these videos are going to go live very, very distributed. So, for the 3rd time this week, if you make a movie, or if you make a game, it has something called direct income. In other words, if I am the executive, hey, let me get my cigar here. So what I'm saying here is, so if I'm this big fat guy with a cigar, and I want to push a movie that I want to get made, and we're going to call it Knife Fight Dance Erosion. Now, Dance Erosion is my own vision for Knife Fight. I really want to get this movie made. So I have to justify that to be made, and then once it's made, I need to point to it as being a success. My own career depends on that. I depend on that. That's my meal ticket, right? That's how the background producers work. They're the ones in the office fighting for things to get greenlit, right? So I need to point to something and say this is the success ratio. So if I make this movie and it comes out, I can directly point to ticket sales because we have a tangible numerical thing saying this is how many sales we had and those sales generated this much revenue. So here's how much money this movie made. Now that's a lie, of course, because that's not how much money the movie made. It's extraordinarily dismissive of a huge number of different factors that are coming into it. Even the budget, even the cost of making a movie that you see, that I myself report on, is itself a lie and doesn't even consider half of the things that go into making a film. But at least I have something direct I can point to and say, boom, that right there, that is something that is a sale. And I can point to that and use that to defend myself, defend my points, and get future things greenlit. Make sense? Same thing with games. There's a reason why most games don't actually list how much money the game made. They list units moved, how many units they've sold. Okay, cool. Same general concept. I can point to that and say we sold X5C. I don't know what kind of number that's supposed to be. 15,000. We moved 15,000 units. There, boom. And especially in the age of digital stuff, that's extremely easy to track because something like Steam will tell you to the exact number how much it is. And yeah, exactly, Darker. Like, there's all kinds of direct sales, direct income. Shows don't make direct income. Back in the day, they would be tied to advertising money, but that was a whole other thing and isn't necessarily directly connected. It's more like a very, very vague estimate of how many people of what demographics they think are watching at what points in time that might have determined how successful a particular show was. But then, now in the streaming age, we can tell exactly how much money or how much time someone spends watching a given show, but even that doesn't tell us how much money the show made, because I subscribe to Netflix for this show and for Cyberpunk, but mainly for Arcane. So does that $15 or $18 or whatever the hell it is nowadays, does that count as Arcane's income? Well, you can't do that linearly, because it's not like I'm just watching Arcane, right? You could, at absolute best, you could say that every show I watched during that $15 is divided amongst those shows to count as their income. And you get it, right? Justifying a show's existence financially, purely economically, is actually tricky. Always has been and always will be. There's a reason why the ridiculous majority of shows ever made are ones you've never heard of, because they only ever got a pilot and then the show was canceled. Make sense? So, all of that is a very roundabout way of trying to say that there's not a lot of economic incentive to make a show with the sheer quality of something like Arcane. Because this took how many years to make? And you can't tell me this was cheap. You cannot tell me that this was a cheap thing, right? Now, this can be looked at from several perspectives, because League of Legends makes a decent amount of money. And League probably was able to bankroll this kind of a thing, right? So they could say that they just siphoned off the money to make the show. That is the kind of thing that makes a weird amount of sense. I know that sounds strange to phrase it that way, but it's something that's actually a semi-common economic model. We made X to make money. We use the money we made from X to make Y, which is what we want to make. But that requires that the actual money people, the people who actually make decisions and greenlight things over at Riot, to specifically have an investment in making Arcane. Now, I'm hands off on that. I have no idea if that's true. But that is one possible reason why Arcane could have been crafted, is that they really, really wanted to make this show, so they were willing to dump money into making this show. The other side of that, of course, is that these things can work as cross-promotion. We actually just saw a great example of that with Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk probably didn't sell particularly well, like in terms of direct income, because there is no such thing, especially for a streaming show. Yet, we do have a lot of tangible data that sales of Cyberpunk the game, 2077, spiked upwards as soon as Cyberpunk Edgerunners came out. So, that's another perspective we can take on that there is a degree of cross-promotional perspective here, that maybe Arcane would drive up League sales. And at the same time, League itself's own sales aren't really linear, because it's not like the aforementioned Cyberpunk. League, now correct me if I'm wrong here, Bonic, but League, last I checked, still relies on the microtransactions model in order to make its money, which means every person that played League as a result of this show may or may not have actually spent any money on the game. So all of this is a huge question mark. Because, yeah, like, this feels like this is launching off some kind of a franchising thing. And Lord knows Riot has pushed out plenty of things that are not League, that are set in Runeterra. Or, excuse me, that are set in the setting of League. Ever since they did the big reboot when they got rid of the Champions idea, which was forever ago at this point. So, unfortunately, all of this is just a discussion to explain in very many words that I don't know how this show got made. I'm happy it did. This is some fantastic artwork. This is something that is added to the substance of the universe. We, as a culture and a society, are uplifted and added to by the virtue of the fact that Arcane exists, and I mean that. We got happy. We got lucky. Excuse me. I was reading the word happy. We got lucky with this one. So thank goodness for that. Also, just to mention this for historical perspectives, those of you watching this on YouTube, in between the previous episode and this one, some season 2 episodes late, I know that that exists. I obviously have not even begun to look into that. I have no interest in spoiling myself on that. I'm actually pretty good at avoiding spoilers on that. If we ever cover Arcane Season 2, I'd like to walk into that blind. So, just giving a bit of a warning. Leaks are leaks. And as long as those leaks are properly caretaken, that's on you. If you want to go and spoil yourself for that, go for it. Anyways. So now that we're done talking about the intro, 20 minutes. Echo has clearly been dealing with some stuff. We go actually to a first-person perspective, the Andor trick, where we actually see through the eyes of the character, and they can actually, and we see Caitlin looking through the mesh bag that's covering her mouth, her head, excuse me. So cool. Echo has been dealing with some stuff. I love the single tear as Vi is hugging him. It's a good little scene. There's not much there. It's something that absolutely could be a fake drama moment and isn't, because this is actually a good show. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. We've covered a lot of good shows. This is not a good show. This is one of the best shows ever made. Echo has obviously been putting up with some stuff. He's grown up a little bit. That makes sense. Then we get to Victor. Victor's voice is so devoid. The voice actor does a great job of this. He sounds dead. He sounds like he's having trouble mustering the energy even to speak. And the doctor, by contrast... Yeah, you still block with your face. The doctor, by contrast, is just the right amount of detached. He sounds not sadistic, but rather just kind of curious. He offers a special batch of shimmer for free. No strings attached. Here you go. Have fun. He also drops a line, which is another bit of wonderful world building. Yeah, this kind of a thing is why I parted ways with Heimerdinger. Now, I shouldn't have been surprised by that, but it does say a lot that Heimerdinger has been around for so long that his life has touched so many other lives, including the elder scientist. And there's another little wonderful thing. Oh, the doctor's name is Singed, apparently. Interesting pun there. Victor says Jace will understand. Cut to Jace, who's playing Iron Man right now. I love the animation in this so much. I really do. There's a wonderful little tidbit where we see Mel's hand, and she's just doing her usual playing around animation thing, and she runs her fingers along this table, but she stops rather suddenly. We don't see the rest of her body. We don't need to, because the body language conveyed by the movement of her hand is all it needs to, as we can tell that she has now caught attention to what's also in the shot for us, the bomb. And then, without actually having to show her looking at it, being like, huh? Instead, we start talking about it. And Jace starts talking about the thing and the nature of how threatening, the Undercity is getting, even though it's functionally just two people, which is funny in its own right. Jace is, of course, massively broken up about... Yeah, I like that too, Casual. Jace is massively broken up about Heimerdinger. Yeah, duh. He never wanted to kick the old man out, and he's probably still broken up about it. I noticed Heimerdinger's only in this episode once, under Cloak and Dagger, sneaking into something. We don't actually see what's following through on that, so that's interesting in its own right. Yeah, sorry, I also have to comment on the fact that Jace likes to build things very physically, very viscerally build things as a way to unwind. Fascinating in its own right. There's a simple little bit of affection. I don't know where they're taking Mel as a character, but you'll notice she's been opening herself up to Jace a little bit. So there's this moment where she just goes forward and rests her forehead against his upper back. It's a little sign of affection, but it's also probably the first sign of affection she's shown anybody in the entire show so far. So it's your time now, Jace. No more red tape. And, well, Mel is still willing to go to bat for him politically, holding off the council and dealing with the more political aspect of things. We don't really see what exactly he's working on, but unfortunately I just watched the intro. He probably smelled pretty bad. He's been pumping iron in the most literal sense of the way possible. Cut to Twitface and Silco. God, the camera's moving so fast in this episode. The Chem Barons are scheduling an assembly. Do you notice how, by the way, each scene does a little bit of, what's it called? Baton passing. Victor's scene of Jace will understand cuts immediately to Jace, who's doing his Iron Man thing. As they talk about the convening of the council and how that's going to be a problem, we cut to Silco, who is being convened in front of a council. He obviously has disdain for this Chem Baron assembly and agitation at being interrupted and trying to find Jinx. And we see that Silco is getting sufficiently aggravated, like it's the strain starting to show a little bit here, that he's willing to show weakness even in front of Twitface, which is something he hasn't been willing to do up to this point. And of course, he's going to go find Jinx, but she says, no, 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 no. She'll come to you when she needs to, which immediately cuts to Jinx. This is what I mean by baton pass, each one of them. Each scene passes the baton to the next one, either literally or thematically. Jinx is so the escalation. Yeah, lights the cigar, immediately puts it out. I caught that too. There's so many details. You do have to forgive me. I'm running on 4 hours of sleep here, so I'm not doing my best here. There's this wonderful tidbit. We've been seeing an escalation in Jinx's hallucinations. At first, they were just like little tidbits, and then they were very, very big tidbits. And then she was talking to herself, and then she was talking to them. And in this episode, we finally get to that last step. Her hallucinations are finally talking to her. We, the audience, can finally hear the hallucinations talking directly to her. Cool. I'm not even sure there's going to be an escalation past that. That's once the hallucinations have started talking to you, things be bad, yo. Like we've passed bad. Bad was like 5 miles back that way, right around the McDonald's and the Arby's. No, we're in Scroodsville at this point. It is also I unfortunately have very little to say about the scene except for how incredibly visually well constructed these scenes are. The visual effects and the edits and the stylings they use to indicate Jinx's shattered mind are really, really, really good, and it's terrifying and awful. Moving on. Jinx, of course, is certainly trying to talk about Vi, which leads immediately to Vi. Vi is talking with Echo, and of course Vi... Oh yeah, I also saw the cracked mirror where I shared. There's so many little details. I'm not going to give every little one because it would just be a frame-by-frame comparison at that point. What is this, the Donkey Kong Country show? Please go watch those VODs. They're very good. But Vi... Why would I remember her name? Caitlin. I caught that too. Vi insists that Powder's still in there. I don't think she is at this point. I really don't think they are at this point. We see the Lost Wall. We see that Vi's on the Lost Wall, along with Powder. And of course, right up the top, and the biggest paintings they've painted by far, are of Vander and Benzo, the deaths that pretty much launched this whole thing. So that makes a degree of sense as well. We see the bridge being closed. People are already protesting the lack of trade and transit between the two cities. That makes sense. Jace goes out to meet Victor. Jace is obviously under a lot of stress and a lot of freaking out. And he's worried because they're from the Undercity. They're dangerous. Now, that makes sense from Jace's perspective because he's just seen a combination of both Shimmer and what it can do and that bomb, which he was just dealing with earlier. In both cases, Jace is literally speaking from a perspective of fear, which is, of course, the problem. It is Victor who then has to remind Jace, I'm from the Undercity. Jace then pulls back a little bit, realizes he's going too far, and he apologizes and tries to get Victor through the checkpoint. Unfortunately, this also leads to Jace asking, did you find anything out? Did you figure anything out? And Victor, at this point now, decides to lie. No. So now Victor is cutting Jace out. Cool. Speaking of people cutting people out, we cut immediately to the Chem Barons. This is actually funny because this guy named Finn, and I only know his name's Finn because the subtitles are there, although they do name drop him once. Finn immediately tries to take control of the situation. Immediately tries to take control of the scene. We should trade the gemstone back. Get some trade better than none, right? Get the bridges back up and everything will be fine. And of course, I had a note, which I wrote down. I wonder if these Chem Barons are so economically incompetent that the moment their throughput dries up, they immediately start going out of business. And then I realized, of course they are, and of course it did. I mean, you saw that Finn had a gold or gold-plated jaw, right? Like, for God's sakes. Dude's trying a little bit too hard, that's all I'm saying. So, then we see Silco playing the crime lord again, and doing a very good job with the role. He just lets out a little bit of gas into the room after cutting off the airflow. It's just the gas from the mines, nothing too fancy. And of course, all of them are coughing, which is itself a sign of weakness and dependency. And then he gets right in Finn's face, like inches from his face. And Finn is desperately trying to prevent himself from coughing. And yeah, notice Silco is breathing just fine. Of course he is. Silco is used to this kind of thing. Silco grew up in those kind of fumes. Yeah, he grew up on this stuff, right? And everyone else is like, cough, cough, hat, cough, because they're not. So, yeah. Power play. Power move. You'll notice that the whole time Twitface had a mask on, too. He finally gives him the damn mask as a sign of that, and then says, all right, good meeting. Bye. Yeah, strong parallels between the Chem Barons and the Council, by the way. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. Yeah, could you imagine being so used to clean air you can't breathe sans air anymore? It's a good scene, but you'll notice how the trend continues. Silco continues to not actually be a good crime lord. He is still playing the role. He has moved in and he's put the foot down, and he's tried to stamp out whatever little rebellion his little nobles were doing. But he hasn't actually done anything. He hasn't changed the situation. He hasn't fixed the situation. In fact, nothing has changed whatsoever from when he enters to when he leaves. I hate to keep pulling in Fisk into this, but if Fisk had walked into this and his nobles, his aristocrats, his Chem Barons, whatever word they want to use there, were like, hey, Fisk would be like, all right, I'll get on top of this, and he would deal with the situation. He'd probably still do the stamp down, possibly kill someone. Oh no, I caught that, Body Punk. But he would at least get on charge of the situation, where Silco is just kind of gambling on Jinx at this point. Like, he doesn't really have much of a plan here. You notice that? This also makes so much sense, because yeah, Silco obviously has no desire to deal with any of this. This is why I keep saying he plays at Crime Lord. He's not a Crime Lord, he's a revolutionary. His goal is to be a rebel. More or less in the traditional Star Wars sense of the word. He is trying to build his own little rebel alliance, and he's done so through underhanded means to gain power and prestige and resources so that he can strike back at those who he perceives as his oppressors. He wants a free Zon and an equal Zon. Okay. So all of this thing is just an irritation to him. Something that you can just feel he doesn't want to deal with. So while he can come down hard and he can play the crime lord quite well, he can't actually do it. He can't hang there. Probably because he doesn't think he needs to. Because once he's done, he can just quit all this, right? Cut to Mel. There's word from overseas about the other nations, and she says Jace isn't ready. Oh. So now we're talking war. Cool. Also, letter from her family. Cool. Cut to the kid letting off. Yeah, I've said this before. I can't remember the name of the town. What's the name of the town? Piltover? Is not a big fish. Everything, even just in this show, is making it clear Piltover is not a big fish. They got lucky. They got one little bit of tech, which has helped them with regards to finances and trade, but they don't even have much of a standing army, for God's sakes. Don't tell me the enforcers count, because they super don't. Yeah, this is a city-state, which has a sister city-state right over there, and the fact that it's not doing as well doesn't really help their situation. Anyways. Caitlyn kind of ousts herself here as being legit. I mean, they take off the thing and she's like, no, let her go. Whatever she wants. I'm the one you want. I'm the one you want. Let her go. And then Vi is right there and she's like, what? it's a good earnest moment. It helps to obviously we know Caitlyn's a good person, but it helps both Echo and Vi to understand that Caitlyn's a good person. It's a nice little thing. I like that. Yeah, my hero. Yeah, the enforcers who are struggling to catch 4 children who broke into the main city. What does Piltover make? So that's actually a good question. I don't want to go too far down that particular rabbit hole, Savacom, but near as I can tell, they don't make much at all. They obviously have a nearby fields. We've seen several shots and several scenes where we zoom out the camera and we see that they've got, farmland and food. But for the most part, what it looks like they make is trade. They operate as a hub. And so they don't really make anything unique at all. Like they probably have, farmland, and they probably have fisheries, and they probably have butcheries and all that fun stuff. But otherwise, yeah, they rely on trade and shipping. Their duties and taxes is exactly how this place functions. We actually saw a whole episode which kind of talked about it, and I talked way too much about it because you know me. Yeah. Yeah, the surrounding polities are the real problem here. I could see that services, because they do have an academy. They've had an academy for years. For years and years and years and years. So yeah, this could be the place where you send your kids, where other nations send their kids to get their own upbringing and their own vocation and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, so Jinx goes for Silco. Yeah, City of Progress. Silco, this is an interesting one because Jinx is being unstable and violent. And you'd think Silco is showing some fear here, but actually he seems weirdly awful. He's so terrible. He's such a terrible person. He is so incredibly codependent and toxic towards her, insisting that her sister, that he didn't know, which he didn't, but that her sister only came back for the gemstone, didn't care about her at all, which is the exact opposite of true, and that they've abandoned us and we can only depend on each other and blah, blah, blah. And just, yeah. I also caught that Jinx rather effectively locks down Silco and could probably have killed him effortlessly right there if she wasn't as unstable as she is. There's a lot of line mentality going on here, but there's a really awful scene, and it's so awful because I can tell you exactly where it's going to go. Echo keeps saying "your people" to Caitlyn, and Caitlyn can't really defend herself, but does try to defend the people that are topside. In other words, normal people, people who aren't really a part of this problem. And there's a lot of back and forth here, but Caitlyn gives an honest and earnest reach out to Echo saying, look, you have every right to that thing, and you can keep it if you want to, but if you give it back to me and we take it topside, we can try to smooth this over. I know someone on the council, and she does, and we can try to make this whole thing, or actually she knows 2 people on the council. We can make this whole thing work out, and we can try to stop the cycle of violence. And Echo's not an idiot, and he also recognizes that she's legit. And that's why this scene is so horrible, because I guarantee you this peace effort is going to go nowhere. Right? Like, that's how this is going to go. This is a tragedy. This is very Greek. And so you cannot tell me that this is going to just sort of work out. That would be awesome if it did, but it's not going to. So, then we see some interesting scenes. I've been talking about the baton pass of the scenes. So what we see here is Echo and Vi, who are 2 longtime friends, and there's one semi-outsider, which is Caitlyn, who comes from a more privileged station than the others, who's trying to work with them in order to try and solve the situation. We cut immediately to 2 longtime friends, Victor and Jace, who have one semi-outsider, Mel, who's trying to get involved and try to resolve the situation. The interesting difference between the 2 is that Caitlyn, the enforcer who's good with a gun, is the one who's trying to argue for peaceful cooperation and trying to help both sides of the problem. Whereas Mel, the person who doesn't even have any combat skills, and the counselor is the one who's arguing for arming for war. I do like how both Victor and Jace are violently against this idea. Yeah. There's also a very nice, if extremely obvious... Yeah, there's no greater advocate for peace than soldiers. That is not always true, historically speaking, but especially in the last century, that's actually been true more often than not. We have a lot of evidence going back at the very least to World War I that the soldiers on the fields were the one most willing to peace in the majority of cases. Not always. Not always. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. There's a lot that can be discussed about that. So, there's a wonderful metaphor here. It's very, very obvious. Victor is trying to piece together the bomb that Jinx left behind. And there's this discussion they're having as Jace says we may not have any choice but to arm ourselves. Victor, who accidentally sets off the bomb, then disarms it and then looks up and says, there's always a choice. Disarming the situation. I'd like to think Jace took that to heart, because Jace was fully on Mel's side until that scene, and then Jace just says, I need to think about this. I need to think about this. I need to process. Just give me some time. Then we see Victor, who is carving runes. Now, we only see him carving runes on the metal brace on his leg. But we also notice that there are bloody runes already carved on his leg. So we don't see the cutting, but we know it happened. And they don't emphasize it. That's nice. That's nice. No need to go too far into it. We can see that and we can understand what he's been doing and how desperate he is. And there's a very quick back and forth thing. Victor's doing his thing. This is when we see Heimerdinger, by the way. We see Jace reading up about the Mage War or Mage Wars. Not sure if it's a plural. And so Victor does just the stupidest thing he possibly could. I mean, I've been making fun of this the whole time, right? You hear a magical artifact talking to you. Nope. But instead, he decides to go ahead and just, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and carve runes into my own flesh and then carve my own blood and then reach out to the art. Yeah, this man is well, we don't actually know what he is. We'll find out in the future, I'm sure. Cut back to Echo, Caitlin, and Vi. Vi decides she has to go back. I have to reach out for powder. So, gives a hug to Echo. Caitlin hugs Vi. That's actually kind of touching. That's a nice little scene. And Jinx sees it. Great. That's fantastic. That's exactly what we all needed here. Yeah, Jinx is just legitimately losing it at this point. More so than she already was. There's this really awful scene where Caitlin reaches out to Marcus. Marcus is in way too deep. He does hesitate to kill her. But Marcus does not, he's down the dark side. It's just a goodbye hug. It's true. It is just a goodbye hug. So he has trouble pulling the trigger, the explosions, all of those wonderful butterflies we've seen being worked on for several episodes now. And we have a wonderful shot where we're super zoomed out and we see them all from a distance. And then we zoom in specifically to see the aftermath. Marcus dies. And as much as he's a dickwad who probably deserves that, I have to admit that's still probably not ideal. I would have rather seen Marcus have a chance to prove that he can be a decent freaking person and actually be a father to his daughter, but that's never happening now. So, yeah, congrats. We now have an orphan. Yay. Echo is down. Caitlin's injured. Jinx is singing. Yeah, I caught that little tidbit. Echo entering the fight was all kinds of badass. You notice that Echo is on top of things and decides to trust Caitlin, as if he hadn't already. Actually flings the gemstones to her and is just like, go! And Vi is actually in tears as she stares at Jinx. Probably processing that this is entirely too far gone at this point. So, Then we see the best fight scene of the entire series. Now, please forgive me just 1 second. This scene is so good. Like, I feel silly dissecting it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just the exact inverse of what I felt like when I was going through the Donkey Kong Country Show thing. Like, it's a short fight, but it doesn't need to be super long. We see flashbacks of present and past, and we see how the shooting game that Echo and Powder used to play wound up. We also know Powder's a very, very good shot, and Echo is very mobile, but of course, she always used to get him. Recreates the moment, recreates the scene, ties into Jinx's shattered memory so that she'll be like, oh, I'll play your game again. Plays her with that and actually gets in the hit and is actually ready to kill her, but can't quite bring himself to because he can't help but see his friend there, which of course is an action he's probably going to very much regret. Now that's a very, very quick run through of an extraordinarily well animated scene. Some people have asked me many, many times, what does gameplay in a non-interactive medium sound like? Or what is that? Like, what's the definition of the gameplay axis in a show or a movie? This fight is gameplay. This is the kind of thing that is extraordinarily good gameplay. The specifics of the animation, the cuts, the shots, the moving camera, the nature of how it progresses, the rewind, the syncing of the ticking of the clock to the music. All of this stuff. Yeah, no, I could just sit down, and unfortunately I actually can't do this, and do a literal frame by frame and just throw it up over here. That's the kind of thing. I mean, sure, there's some story too, but it's the story is buried by the gameplay, is my point. It's crazy good. It's absolutely crazy good. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention that we are ending things on a bridge where a massacre just happened because Jinx just caused one twice. I don't even know where to delve into this too much more because it's just very, very, very good. And that's actually where the scene ends. This is the kind of fight I would actually expect in like the second or even third episode of this final arc, as opposed to the first one. This is crazy. I don't know what else to add to this. This is absolutely crazy good. Which means we have to give the review now. We have to give the rating. Am I out of water? Is that what this is? I am. My goodness. Now, for those of you saying purple, I should say something before I give my own opinion on the matter. For those of you not aware, purple requires a little bit of extra oomph. Something else that pulls it, drags it, one might say, to the top of the list. Just like Lamentation at the very bottom requires something else to drag it down, some extra little oomph, other than simply being very, very good or very, very bad. Functionally, a purple is a red with oomph, just like a black is a blue with oomph. Probably not, Darkrai. You have to understand, we didn't even watch the worst of the DKC show. I saw that, Imperial Star Destroyer. Echo even flat out mentions, if a single seed can sprout down here, then so can we, I believe was the line. And I do like the overall vibe. I refuse to believe that hope exists in this setting. It's all going to go badly. Of course it is. Like, I know that sounds weird, but I've actually been de-investing myself in the fate of these characters because they're all going to die or worse. Fine. Whatever. I'm hands off. There's no happy endings. Cool. Now we're just into analysis mode. We keep coming back to that Andor thing, don't we? You gotta have that light at the end. Yeah, no, Cyberpunk. I knew walking into Cyberpunk, to compare this for just a second. Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which, by the way, just as a quick aside, you cannot find a more distant gap in quality, in terms of just animation quality, excuse me, not the quality like the storytelling, but like the gameplay axis, the animation. Because Arcane is one of the most well-animated things ever. It is functionally 3D, and that is, in my opinion, a different category. But I think I mentioned this earlier. I had someone who is familiar with animation, who's actually a professional animator, go through a couple of shots of several shows, including Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and they were shocked at how bad Edgerunners animation actually is. It's not the worst that I had them cover. Can anyone guess what the actual worst is that I had them cover? Yeah, but yeah, Cyberpunk has no hope. That's just Cyberpunk. Warhammer 40k has no hope. That's just Warhammer 40k. It's actually why I've never been particularly well invested in either setting. DKC. Oh, no, 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 no. No, it was actually a show called Wacky Racers. How many of you have even heard of that? Seriously, does anybody in chat know what Wacky Racers are? It's pretty old, but I was specifically trying to establish a floor. And with my own ignorant, non-professional animator perspective, Hanna-Barbera is the worst animation ever made. So I went ahead and I had them look at Hanna-Barbera stuff, and yeah, no, the Hanna-Barbera stuff is the worst animation. It's actually, like they were telling me in full detail, I should have taken notes. They were telling me in full detail, like, how objectively, professionally bad Hanna-Barbera is animated. Star Trek the Animated Series was actually a step up from that. Only one step up, I'm gonna be honest with you, but it was a step up. Which one specifically? Yes. I don't remember the full list. We had I had them look at Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Wacky Racers. I mentioned that. There was the Barbarian one, like Barbario. I can't actually remember the name of the damn show, and like two others. Very, very, very bad animation. Extraordinarily cheap, which I suppose is the point. Anyways, I'm getting entirely too far off topic, because the point is that person has also analyzed this show. Now, granted, again, it's CGI, and CGI is different, but this show just kind of crushes everything when it comes to animation. I agree with Purple. This show continues to impress with its quality. And it's kind of scary how good it is. Which means now we have to cover the next episode. Now I'm going to be a little bit longer than usual because I need to go, like get some freaking water. Because I'm out. But otherwise, I'll be back in about an hour.